Illinois politicians want to change the word offender to justice-impacted individuals. Let's talk about it on Azimuth Podcast. I'm Kimberly McNabb, and with me is Barrett McNabb.
Thanks, Kimberly. So the name change makes criminals sound less dangerous, right? But it also sounds like, one way you could actually refer to the victim instead of the criminal. I mean, give me a break.
Yeah, this is all just jargon. I mean, words, they're employed to deceive rather than communicate clearly here. And to boot, amongst Democratic elites, changing language is used to make others feel inadequate while you're with the in crowd. I mean, come on, these are criminals.
Couldn't agree more. Yep.
They broke the law. They offended the public, so they should be called offenders. Don't do the crime if you don't want to be offended. This isn't about their feelings, though. I mean, it's about the elites reading the documents for their feelings. So, and it also makes the criminals seem less dangerous. So, it's easy for their dainty little eyes to go easier on the criminals after reading the language of justice-impacted individuals.
Yeah, I couldn't agree, Kimberly. I mean, one of the things that if you notice whenever you have a criminal case, and let's just say that that's a murder, right? Mm-hmm. And Janet Smith was murdered by Sylvester Dominguez. Okay, I just made up those names, right? The case is not Smith versus Dominguez, right? That's not. So when you talk about getting justice for an individual, the case isn't the two parties, the victim and the offender. It is the state of Michigan versus Dominguez. Mm-hmm. Right? Because the crime is not being punished against the individual, the victim. The crime was committed against society as a whole. Right? And so when you are, saying justice impacted individuals, this just doesn't make any sense because, again, it's the state versus the offender. And if you're using justice impacted, I mean, like you said, the victim could be justice impacted as well, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, especially if you're letting them off the hook.
Yeah, and also what's as far as having to save the planet, having to have paper and reprint all the documents and things like that, it's going to cost thousands of dollars to change the language in all of the state's agencies. I mean, changing happy to glad and glad to sad, it has second and third order effects. I mean, taxpayers have to pay to have all of those changes met. And I can promise you, it's not going to be an addendum that's shoved at the beginning of whatever document that says, hey, just let you know, we've made this change. And so just go ahead and in your mind, change it in the document. No, they're going to reprint all those documents.
Yeah, where are the client activists now? Oh, save the trees.
Yeah, exactly. and again, they're criminals. Mm-hmm. The harsh language needs to stay, and they need to put their big boy pants on. Don't do the crime if you can't do the time, right? Honestly, this is ridiculous. It really is. But when we act benevolently towards cruel people, ultimately they become, and we be cruel to the general public. Again, it goes to that broken windows theory of when you are letting crimes, small petty crimes go by, it's going to exacerbate the problem and you'll start to see bigger crimes, right? Mm-hmm. So, when we see in Oregon where they are putting rapists on panels alongside victims to look at recidivism rates and how to better look at their parole and things like that. Again, it's bad behavior on the part of the government.
They're being nice to the wrong people.
Yeah,
Be nice to the victims. Get justice for them.
Exactly.
But, unfortunately, we see this everywhere. Here at home with our crime, not prosecuting and, releasing criminals. And we see it at our borders. We're letting everyone in. And then, they go off and they kill Laken Riley in Georgia or punch cops in the face in New York or kill a 2-year-old boy in Maryland.
Right.
Because we feel sorry for the immigrants. Why do we feel sorry for future victims? Why don't we feel sorry for our own citizens who are having to pay for it? We see this overseas as well. We surrender to terrorism by agreeing to conduct diplomatic negotiations with terrorist organizations, which only encourages further terrorism.
Yeah, what's kind of interesting about this as well is we've talked about George Carlin, amazing comedian. When he passed, it was just a travesty to comedic genius overall. I mean, he's just absolutely funny, and we've mentioned this before, but he had the evolution of language as well, and talking about the softening, this generalized softening. And so when you look at World War I, you had shell shock.
Right.
Shell shock. I mean, it tells you exactly what happened to you, right? And then as you get into World War II, the language was changed to combat fatigue. So, you can see a softening of the language. And then the language that we use today and was transitioned or first started in Vietnam was the post-traumatic stress disorder. And so to go from shell shock to PTSD, you can see that continuous softening of the language. And he had a whole bit on that, just softening it up.
Well, yes, and also you can get PTSD from a lot of things, not just war. That's obviously one of the worst causes of it.
Right.
But, this amendment also adds members to the Adult Redeploy Illinois Oversight Board.
Yeah, when you told me about that, I was like, oh, what?
Yeah, one of these. Anytime I hear a board or a committee, I'm like, that's just an excuse for someone to get paid to seem like they're doing something, but really probably not doing much. And so what this does is it provides financial incentives to jurisdictions for diverting people convicted of non-violent crimes from prisons to community-based services like rehab to promote equity and to diversify the board and enhance funding flexibility. So, when the government says funding flexibility, I'm like, yeah, I'm wondering what that means. Enhanced funding, board members get paid, right?
Right.
Well, so wouldn't that just cost the taxpayers more? That's what I hear. But instead of promoting equity and diversity, what about promoting objective measures like effectiveness, like people commit less crimes?
Yeah, I would have to say that when you are again softening the language, and these are not criminals anymore. I mean, what are the second and third order effects? Job applications, right? Have you ever committed a felony? I believe is on a job application. I don't really recall if there's a misdemeanor line on there, but definitely have you ever been convicted of a felony is on there. And
it could be confusing if you have one set of documents that calls the same thing one thing,
sure, yep.
And then you go to apply for a job and it says, have you ever committed a felony? Well, they didn't call it that.
Right.
So no. Well, you lied.
Right. And if you also, how is this going to affect people who are cross state boundaries? So like Gary, Indiana is at the very northwest corner of Indiana, and it's right by Chicago. Right. Mm-hmm. So you've got people that are possibly committing crimes in Gary, Indiana, and then they cross over into Chicago. How does that language impact them? Because the language isn't being changed in Indiana.
Right.
So I mean, this is just localized, but it just seems as though some of the more left-leaning states, they really like to push the envelope, and I'd have to say New York State, Illinois, California, they like to stretch the boundaries and then get the other states to follow suit. Right. So there's whatever program that California has, they like to tell, we're first in the nation to do X. Right. So this is going to be one of those. Illinois, we're first in the nation to soften the language used to define criminals.
Well, to be the first of something is not always a good thing. Like change is not always a good thing. I go in and rob a bank. I'm the first one in my family to rob a bank. Okay, that's not a good thing. Oh, I created change in the bank because it has less cash.
Right.
not necessarily a good thing, but a lot of times the softening of language is also very divisive, and it makes it harder for people and agencies to speak to each other. And
That's a good
I think
point.
that's a primary goal, is to create chaos and divisiveness and confusion everywhere they go, under the guise of, oh, aren't we the nice ones?
Right.
I call BS.
Well, yeah, especially since obviously the criminals aren't the nice ones. And again, I think that if you soften this up to, free hugs, you're just going to see more crime, because as we've seen, when bail is reduced, states and the municipalities introduce no cash bail. Here in Houston, we have not enough police officers, and so there's not enough manpower to solve and go through all the cases they have. And so you've got people who have been arrested for murder get bail, and they're out on the street committing more murder just because the police can't investigate the cases.
Well, it may also attract out-of-state crime.
We've actually talked about that.
Yeah, like in Portland, they decriminalized drugs, and people came and were like, hey, I can do all the drugs I want here.
Right. And also, we had talked about people from New York committing crimes in New York and then going to Florida.
I'm not sure why they thought they could do that.
Yeah, I mean, Florida said, look, if you commit crime here and go back up to New York, we're going to catch you and we're going to throw you in jail.
Yeah.
So don't try it the inverse way. But I think this is systemic of all languages being softened. It's not helping. All it's doing is enabling.
Yep.
Yeah, I agree. So we saw this and we wanted to bring it to your attention. So thank you for tuning in to Azimuth Podcast. Please stay tuned after these messages.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for listening. If you enjoy our show with all the stories we share, we would love your support.
And it's as easy as clicking that subscribe or follow button. This will ensure you never miss an episode and keeps us bringing you these important stories. Your support makes a huge difference. Thank you so much for being part of our podcast family.
Thanks, and keep tuning in. The U.S. has assessed that Russia likely launched a counter-space weapon last week that is close to and capable of attacking a U.S. government satellite orbiting nearby. Well, what is a space weapon? Let's talk about it on Azimuth Podcast. I'm Kimberly McNabb, and with me as always is Barrett McNabb.
Yeah, thanks, Kimberly. So these are weapons that can attack space systems in orbit. For example, anti-satellite weapons attack targets on Earth from space or disable missiles traveling through space. So it ranges a wide gambit.
Well, why care about satellites, other than for satellites for our cell phones?
Yeah, so as we all know, satellites have a variety of uses, including communications, weather forecasting, navigation, all the GPS satellites, broadcasting, scientific research, and Earth observation. Additional military uses are reconnaissance, early warning, and signals intelligence, and potentially weapon delivery. So U.S. offensive systems are totally reliant on satellites. As we see, the HIMARS rockets, which are GPS guided in Ukraine, that the U.S. gave Ukraine, is now starting to slowly become less effective as Russia starts to rely on GPS jamming. So that's, some ground-based defenses that Russia has. But our defenses are also dependent on satellites, as, they give us missile launch warnings and missile tracking. NORAD uses those to make sure that North America is safe from incoming ballistic missile threats. The launch comes at a time as the U.S. and its allies are increasingly concerned about Russia's efforts to develop nuclear space weapon capable of destroying commercial and government satellites. And it's kind of interesting because back in February, a Republican senator had received a classified intelligence. Was it House or Senate?
It was House.
House.
Mike Turner from Ohio.
Right. So he received a classified intelligence brief and said, look, I can't tell you what the brief is about, but I highly recommend the Biden administration declassify it so that the American public can know about it. And eventually, through channels, it was talking about this nuclear space-based weapon. And interestingly, the news media kind of made fun of it. And for me, I'm like, that's not something to laugh at. I'm surprised it hasn't happened already. I mean, honestly,
It is Russia.
I mean, it's Russia. I mean, I'm surprised that there's not already 12, up there. But U.S. officials said in remarks before a vote on the UN Security Council resolution drafted by Russia on outer space security that on May 16th, Russia launched a satellite into Earth orbit that the United States had assessed as likely that counter space weapon that we talked about. And it's presumably capable of attacking other satellites in low Earth orbit. Now, Russia deployed this new counter space weapon in the same orbit as a U.S. government satellite. So is that a coincidence? I don't think so.
No. Well, it undermines Russia's claims that it is seeking outer space security.
Yeah, that seems to me to be just BS. I mean, that's just a smokescreen. Obviously, there's lots of political speak that goes into this, but a U.S. official separately told CNN that the U.S. had been expecting the launch for at least the last several weeks, and North American Aerospace Defense Command, NORAD, and U.S. Northern Command tracked it as it happened. So the Russia issued these NOTAMs, which are notices to airmen. And those are anytime you're going to be utilizing in airspace or informing other countries that there's going to be some type of activity. Obviously, you don't want to be flying an airliner over Kazakhstan as Roscosmos launches a missile into space and hit a 747. So they put these no-fly areas. But it became active on May 16th, indicating a possible space launch. One was for the launch itself, right, for the satellite, and the other was for a reentry of some space junk that was supposed to hit off the coast of Baja California. And so, the good news, there is some good news. So the good news is that the NOTAM responsible is a normal way for nations to support safe air and maritime activities. And so it is good that Russia at least told us that they were going to be launching something.
Yeah, they could have said nothing.
They could have said nothing, and then we would have just, obviously seen that missile go up. Everybody starts to panic. The pucker factor starts to set in when you just have this ICBM launching up, because then you want to see if it's followed by anything else. So our systems go to a higher state of readiness. But by letting us know that they were launching something, we were at least able to track that. Now, again, they didn't say what they launched, but the intelligence says that it's this space weapon. So the U.S. and its allies have been working to deter Russia from developing this nuclear space weapon. If it's deployed, the weapon it's going to be a nuclear explosion in space, right? And so you're going to have destruction of intelligence satellites. You're going to have communication satellites that are going to go down. Telescopes that the European Space Union has put into space. The Hubble Space Telescope, all that kind of stuff would be affected. But it would also create this massive energy wave called an EMP, or electromagnetic pulse, and it's going to cripple electronic devices depending upon where it's exploded in our atmosphere and how close it was to the U.S. But again, commercial, government, all would be affected.
Be like Leave the World Behind, that movie.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, in April, the U.S. and Japan jointly introduced a UN Security Council resolution that called for UN member states not to develop space-based nuclear weapons. But Russia vetoed it.
Surprise.
Something the U.S. saw as a sign that it is indeed pursuing a nuclear space-based weapon.
Yeah, I mean, if you're not wanting to do it, and someone says, well, okay, hey, let's go ahead and put this in writing, and you veto it, then odds are
a little suspicious.
Yeah, odds are you're developing this space-based weapon, and again, I'm surprised that it hasn't happened already.
Right.
I think there's a movie, Space Cowboys. So there's a movie.
With Tommy Lee Jones?
Tommy Lee Jones,
Oh, yes.
Clint Eastwood. And the premise of the movie is that Skylab, which was a space station, U.S. space station that was a precursor to the International Space Station, had some kind of navigation, special navigation system, whatever. And the Russians have a satellite that is coming out of orbit, and they need assistance. And the whole thing is well, how did a Russian satellite get Skylab's navigation system? So without going further, too much further in the movie, bottom line, they launch these old guys into space. They go to the satellite, and inside the satellite is like 12 nuclear weapons that are already in space, aimed down to be a first strike capability. So, I mean, come on. They did it in Hollywood, so why wouldn't Russia be doing that in real life? And it turns out they are.
Well, art's loosely based on reality, or vice versa, whichever way you want to argue it. So National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said in a statement on April 24th, as we have noted previously, the United States assesses that Russia is developing a new satellite carrying a nuclear device. We have heard President Putin say publicly that Russia has no intention of deploying nuclear weapons in space. Well, if that were the case, Russia would not have vetoed this resolution.
Yeah, I mean, it's just common sense. Hey, let's all sign an agreement that we're not going to commit crime. Okay, that'll work, right? But the Russian weapon is still under development as far as the nuclear weapon, and not yet in orbit, according to our intelligence sources. But the Biden administration officials have emphasized that it's on the horizon, right? It's on the horizon. But if used, it would cross a dangerous Rubicon in the history of nuclear weapons. I mean, that would be obviously a first. Now, Russia introduced its own rival resolution earlier this month, calling for the prohibition for all time on the placement of weapons in space. So no weapons in space at all.
Not just not nuclear.
Exactly. Okay. But the U.S. vetoed it on Monday because it does not achieve the simple task that we set out to achieve several months ago, and to reaffirm the basic obligations of the Outer Space Treaty and avoid a nuclear arms race in outer space. But, U.S. officials and the U.S. ambassador took particular issue with the resolution's call for a binding mechanism to ban any space-based weapons, saying such a ban cannot be verified, right? Because, the famous Reagan quote, "Trust but verify." And that the resolution was an attempt by Russia to distract global attention from its development of a new satellite carrying a nuclear device. I mean, give me a break. But this really isn't new. I mean, one of my favorite books as a middle schooler and high schooler was by Tom Clancy, the techno thriller. He's the one that invented the techno thriller novel, and it's Red Storm Rising, and it was 1986 that it came out, and it's ultimately a World War III conflict between the Soviet Union and the United States, and NATO as well. But one of the opening salvos that Russia did, or the Soviet Union did, in the book was they had a satellite that was in orbit, and a bunch of naval reconnaissance, so satellites that were looking for naval ships and things like that, noticed that a Soviet satellite had kind of changed its trajectory, and they said, well, we'll just keep an eye on it. And right before Russia or the Soviet Union launched their attacks, they're like, hey, we can't find the satellite anymore, this Soviet satellite, and they are spinning it, and the cameras pick up the satellite right next to the naval satellite, and it detonates. And so that's back in 1986 that Tom Clancy, talked about satellite warfare. But the Strategic Defense Initiative, which I really thought was always pretty cool because it was nicknamed the Star Wars program. George Lucas actually sued because he said, having this
like he didn't have enough money.
Yeah, exactly. Well, he just said that having these weapons being associated with Star Wars hurt his brand, and so anyway, the lawsuit was tossed out. So they said, look, there's no reasonable assumption that your movie and Hollywood is going to be misassociated with American defense. So anyway, that was thrown out, but still, it was nicknamed Star Wars, and Ronald Reagan talked about it in a speech in '83, and he said, "Look, I want to put our technological and intellectual horsepower into taking a look at this and seeing what we could do, because this." The mutually assured destruction, the MAD, which was kind of the status quo with the United States having, thousands of nuclear weapons and the Soviet Union having thousands of nuclear weapons. Nobody would do a first launch, because then you would counter launch, and
Right.
both countries and arguably most of the world would just be completely wiped out, and so therefore nobody would ever be the first to pull the trigger. But
Right, because no one would win.
nobody would win. Nobody would win, and except people living in Argentina, I guess, by the South Pole.
People in Kansas with like 1950s era nuclear bunkers.
Maybe, yeah, maybe. But anyway, the Soviet Union kind of was like, well, if you're going to start destroying our missiles in space with these weapons, then we need to be looking at that as well. And so the Soviets in 1987 tried to test the components of a carbon dioxide laser, and it was called the SKIF, SKIF laser. And they had a competing space station, the Mir. And again, this is prior to the International Space Station as well. But they had this carbon dioxide laser and the components disguised as a Mir space station module. And they launched it into outer space to be able to test these components of this carbon dioxide laser. And fortunately for us, the guidance system failed. And so when it separated from the booster, it failed to reach orbit. And so we didn't have anything, that was able to do that. But interestingly enough on that as well, the same Zara module that had failed, that's actually keeps the International Space Station in its orbit as well. So they luckily it worked that time.
Mm-hmm.
But this just goes again to this height of this aggression by Russia, and to be fair, China's doing the same aggression as well. But Russia, invading Ukraine, you've got the maritime and the maritime boundaries between Russia and I believe it's Estonia. Russia has gone and pulled up a bunch of buoys that mark the boundary on the river, and just is saying we're just going to move these. And then just recently, the Ministry of Defense had a resolution that they're going to redraw the maritime boundaries between Norway and Russia as well, just arbitrarily. They're just like, hey, we're just going to move the boundary because, yeah, we signed something, 20 years ago that locked in the boundaries, but we feel the maps weren't as accurate then as.
Of course they don't.
Yeah, and so they're just going to steal territory, and this is kind of where Nikki Haley, a lot of her campaign speeches was when Putin says that the Baltics are going to come back under his sphere of influence, that also the Latvia, Estonia, they're going to come back under, Poland's going to come back under his sphere of influence. If somebody says it, you got to believe them, right? And so here we have, just, hey, we're arbitrarily redrawing our borders. And that's effectively what some of Russia's argument is, that why they're just grabbing Ukraine, is that Ukraine should never have been a country anyway. It was part of the United States, and the Nazis are back, and we're just going to grab some of this territory.
Wow. Well, that's a lot.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I keep apprised. Obviously, I retired from the Army 9 years ago, but I still keep apprised of all this stuff. And it's very interesting to me. I looking at geopolitics and having this happen when it's happening is just a critical time in our life. And I really feel that the Biden administration has played a part. I'm not going to say, a large part because I don't know that, but they definitely not a small part, but definitely a part in seeing this emboldened behavior from some of our historic enemies.
Well, when your enemies see you as weak,
Right.
and disorganized, as with the withdrawal from Afghanistan,
Yep.
I mean, it was like signal go.
Right.
Yeah,
I mean, I just it saddens me because obviously we've worked very hard to have the international order where it benefits everybody, and now we're going to see this new domain of warfare potentially up in space. And don't get me started on China and Russia wanting to go to the moon. I think that's going to be a huge problem. We're probably going to have to do a separate video on this, but just to kind of give you a preview, I mean, the islands that China is building in the South China Sea, the United States and the United Nations say, hey, look, this is not your territory. And they say, oh, we're just building these islands, to kind of be for navigation purposes. We're building these islands just for research purposes. We're not going to militarize these islands. And, the United States and the UN, other countries, let them do it. And then, surprise, surprise, they are armed to the teeth.
that's kind of like telling your toddler, don't get up on the table.
Yeah. I mean,
and then they climb up this tall chair right next to the table. Like, well, why else are they going to be there? Because they're going to get up on the table.
Yeah, and so they militarize these islands, and they want to put research stations, manned research stations on the moon. Here, am I going to be the first person on the internet to make this prediction? If China is allowed to have a lunar base or a base on Mars,
what do you think they're going to do with it?
They're going to militarize that base. I'm the first one to say it. Great. That'll be awesome. That'll be a quote. If we allow them to have lunar bases and bases on Mars, they will militarize those bases, and those lunar bodies and planetary bodies will be a new source of conflict.
Yeah, a new launch pad, too.
New launch pad as well. So we saw this and we thought it was interesting, so we wanted to bring it to your attention. But thank you so much for tuning into Azimuth Podcast. Please stay tuned after these messages.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for listening. If you enjoy our show with all the stories we share, we would love your support.
And it's as easy as clicking that subscribe or follow button. This will ensure you never miss an episode and keeps us bringing you these important stories. Your support makes a huge difference. Thank you so much for being part of our podcast family.
Thanks, and keep tuning in.
If you could look inside President Joe Biden's mind, what would you find? Let's talk about it on Azimuth Podcast. I'm Barrett McNabb, and with me is my wife, Kimberly McNabb. So we saw something on the Babylon Bee, and if you're not familiar with the Babylon Bee, it is a huge satirical site. They have amazing comment. They make fun of all kinds of stuff. It's not just making fun of liberals. If you're a conservative and you mess up, man, you're going to wind up on their website. But they do memes, they do articles, and they also do short movies. And they did a short movie revolving around Disney's movie Inside Out. And if you're not familiar with that movie, it's about a young girl who is growing up and has different ranges of emotions. And the 50% of the movie, I'd say actually 75% of the movie takes place in her head, and it has the various emotions: sadness, happy, anger.
And they're running the gears inside of her head.
So they're kind of moving her body around, and so they have different colors and stuff like that. So anyway, Babylon Bee did a parody of Inside Out and had it go inside Joe Biden's head. So let's take a look at this.
We also need Ukraine to make changes to fix the broken immigration system here.
Did we just say Ukraine?
Fix it! Somebody fix it quick!
I'm on it.
We also need Congress to make the changes to fix the broken immigration system here at home.
Oh, that was a close one, but I think we got away with it.
Shut up, you dog-faced pony soldier.
Hey, come on, man. We are a doddering old man that gets to be the president, okay? How cool is that? Who wants an ice cream cone?
Shut up. Whose freaking fault was that just now? Who said Ukraine needs to fix the immigration system?
Sorry.
Dementia? How'd you get in here, buddy?
I don't know.
All right, get out right now.
Okay. All right. This way. This way. Yeah. Oh, there we go. That's a good way, too. Hey, take my ice cream cone. You like my ice cream cone, right?
I'm not, to be that guy again, but while we're all arguing about this, who is running the speech? We need to choose our words.
There is some movement.
This is hysterical, especially we have young kids, and so we've actually seen the movie Inside Out. It's a great movie if you haven't seen it. They're doing Inside Out 2, where the same girl is now a teenager, and so I look forward. We'll have to take a quick look before we show it to the kids, and if there's anything that we don't want to talk about teenage, but still, it was a great movie. It was a big hit.
And I don't want to, well, maybe choose my words.
No, don't say choose my words out loud. That's just the part I say in here.
There's some movement. There's been a response from the...
From Hamas!
There's been a response.
And no one should wonder why President Trump calls President Biden Sleepy Joe. I mean,
Right.
seriously, he looks like his leg's about to start kicking, as you start to go to sleep. I mean, come on.
Yeah, this is hysterical and painful to watch at the same
because
time.
sometimes the truth hurts.
Yeah, exactly.
From
The opposition!
the opposition.
The opposition? Why did you say the opposition?
It's just what I do.
Yes, I'm sorry. From Hamas.
Why does he keep glitching like this?
Sorry. Wasn't I supposed to unplug this?
Oh, Dementia, how'd you get in here, buddy?
I was walking around and here I was.
Well, why don't we just go this way and we'll get you some Jell-O, okay? Doesn't that sound good? Jell-O!
The French president is Mitterrand.
I sat down and I said, America's back. And Mitterrand from Germany
From France!
said, how long you back for?
Macron is the president of France.
No,
Oh God.
He even has one eye closed.
Again, this is hysterical because of the addition of the dementia character. I mean, this is good. This is good.
I'm pretty sure Macron is a cookie. As sure as I am that Mexico is on the border of Israel.
President of Mexico, Sisi, did not want to open up the gate to allow humanitarian to get in.
No.
What the bleep is going on?
Maybe that's why our border's open, because he's confusing borders that's supposed to be protected.
Yeah, I mean, he's obviously talking about the border in between, because Sisi is the president of Egypt, and so he's trying to talk about that. But again, he's talking about Mexico. This guy is a can of soup.
Well, if you've ever seen pictures of the Egyptian wall, it is a beautiful wall. That's the one we need.
Right.
Around here.
What is going on around here? I don't know.
That's it. Listen up, Fats. He's in charge now. We are incapable of giving a softball interview.
Okay.
We're not even mentally competent enough to stand trial for mishandling classified documents. We are an embarrassment. Someone else is gonna have to take over as president.
But who? Who else is there?
It's very important, as you have heard from so many incredible leaders, for us at every moment in time, and certainly this one, to see the moment in time in which we exist and are present, and to be able to contextualize it, to understand where we exist in the history and in the moment as it relates not only to the past but the future.
That makes me think of our 5-year-old daughter trying to explain something. And it's like, you're using English, not your French, but I still don't understand what it is you're trying to describe.
Right.
We'll put a link below, but there was a site that compared Kamala Harris to a crystal, like a new age crystal lady.
Okay.
Hysterical. Absolutely hysterical.
I have to take a look at that one as well. But, my favorite word salad of hers was when she was at NASA and she was explaining how a rocket works to the people that designed and built them. And the rocket caught on fire and it slowly started to lift off. And we went through the atmosphere and it picked up speed and we got to outer space in the booster and then we're in outer space. And these NASA engineers are looking at her and they were more polite than I would have been because basically she was explaining what happens that they already know to a 3-year-old level. It was crazy.
I think our 7-year-old would do a better job.
So I got to tell you guys, she went back on the boat and she threw the necklace back in the water.
No way.
Why don't I remember this?
I was bawling.
Guys, he's getting off the helicopter. We gotta say something to the press.
Wait, where's Dementia?
He's in the bathroom.
My butt's been wiped.
That was absolutely hysterical. I love their inventiveness. I have a friend of mine he may be undercover on their staff because he has the same level of humor, and you know who I'm talking about. Same level of humor. In fact, he might be the founder of Babylon Bee. I don't know. Obviously, he's not, but still, he has the exact same sense of humor, and he could easily be a staff writer on these guys, and he may be. I don't know.
Well, he does work for the government. So.
Yeah, that's true. So we thought that this was hysterical because it's so true, and that's often what makes things even more funny is the fact that that there's such a huge element of truth to this, and the fact that
you're not supposed to say it.
Yeah, exactly, and the fact that they were able to put it on to this Inside Out parody, I thought this was hysterical. Mm-hmm. Yep. So we saw this and we wanted to bring it to you, and hopefully you got a laugh out of it as well. But thank you so much for joining Azimuth Podcast. Please stay tuned after these messages.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for listening. If you enjoy our show with all the stories we share, we would love your support.
And it's as easy as clicking that subscribe or follow button. This will ensure you never miss an episode and keeps us bringing you these important stories. Your support makes a huge difference. Thank you so much for being part of our podcast family.
Thanks, and keep tuning in.